we proceed with this second set of slides for administrative law. Again, mostly following the outline of Professor Cecilio Duca of UMAC. No? We proceed with the quasi-legislative power. Quasi-legislative power is the authority delegated by the lawmaking body to the administrative body to adopt rules and regulations intended to carry out the provisions of law and implement legislative policy. It is in the nature of subordinate legislation, which is designed to implement a primary legislation by providing the details thereof. This is heavily discussed in our constitutional law 1 when we spoke of the valid delegations of legislative authority. If you recall, we can distinguish what legislative power is and quasi-legislative power, because kapag sinasabing legislative power, it is the discretion to determine what the law shall be. That is the plenary legislative function of Congress. They can determine what law they have of the current need, no, based on the current need of the times, and our Congress, because of its plenary power of legislation, can create laws of any subject or object within its jurisdiction. While quasi-legislative power is not the power to determine what the law shall be. It is simply the discretion as to how the law should be enforced. So, quasi-legislative power originates from legislative power. The spring cannot rise higher than the source. That's why when you speak of quasi-legislative power, this is the power that comes from and is originating from law itself. No? So, remember the concept again of non-delegation of legislative powers. Well, the general rule is potestas delegate, non delegare potest, meaning what has been delegated cannot be further delegated. But the exception is a valid delegation of such power. For example, the valid delegation of legislative power. Calalang versus Williams would say that the lawmaking body cannot possibly provide for all the details in the enforcement of a particular statute, administrative regulation, or subordinate legislation calculated to promote public interest as are necessary because of the growing complexity of the modern life, the multiplication of the subjects of governmental regulation, and the increased difficulty of administering the law. So this recognizes, again, the complexity of the modern times that may require specific specialization or expertise or competence in a specific field of law. For example, environmental law must be given to experts in environmental law. Privacy laws must be given to the experts on the laws on privacy or the mechanisms on the right to privacy. So Congress would give the PNR, for example, the National Privacy Commission, the Commission on Higher Education, and the DepEd powers to come up with memorandum orders or implementing rules. For the DepEd, they have the DepEd memorandum order. For the CHED, they have their CHED memorandum order. CMOs and other agencies have their circulars. Others have their IRRs. No, these are all implementing the intricacies of the laws. No, through filling in the details through those so-called implementing rules and regulations or circulars or memorandum. No? That's a delegation of legislative power. No? You recall that for there to be a permissible delegation of legislative authority, two tests must be passed by the Act. No, the delegation is valid if it is complete in itself and the law fixes a standard. No. So it is complete in itself. It sets forth therein the policy to be executed, carried out, and implemented by the delegate. So the law must be complete. Second, it must fix a standard. No, a standard must be fixed so that there is the capacity of bakit puros one yan, dapat two ng isa. The delegate must not exceed the authority given him. So the the standard set is the boundary in which the delegate performs his actions. So, what are the tests to determine the validity of an administrative issuance? No? Well, the case of Dagan versus Philippine Racing Commission, I think we took this up also when we discussed this delegation of authority or legislative power in Congress, no, in Consti 1. The validity of an administrative issuance hinges on the compliance of the following requisites. The promulgation must be authorized by Congress. It must be promulgated in accordance with prescribed procedure. It must be within the scope of the authority given the legislature, and it must be reasonable. Try to go over this case of Dagan versus Philippine Racing Commission for the explanation. Here's this case, Review Center Association versus Ermita. Professor Duca in his lecture also cited this one. Here kasi, law, that SHED issued a directive regulating review centers. However, it was assessed that the directive of the memorandum of order of SHED on the matter of the operation of review centers goes beyond the authority given to it by RA 7722 or the SHED law. The review centers are not part of what you call higher education anyway. These are review centers and not part of the education system. So SHED here exceeded in its authority. So again, regulations cannot exceed or extend law. According to US versus Ugasi, administrative regulations adopted under the legislative authority by a particular department must be in harmony with the provisions of law and should be for the sole purpose of carrying into effect the general provisions. By such regulations, of course, the law cannot be extended. Also, Santos versus Stenzo, an administrative agency cannot amend the act of Congress. Again, the spring cannot rise higher than the source. Administrative regulations, IRRs, memoranda, circulars of administrative agencies only fill in the details, but they cannot extend the law or exceed the law itself because they are subordinate to legislation. Okay. The second is what you call quasi-judicial power. This is also known as adjudicatory power. It's the power to hear and determine questions of fact to which the legislative policy is to apply and to decide in accordance with the standards laid down by law itself in enforcing and administering the same law. This is Alliance of Non-Life Insurance Workers versus Mendoza. This case speaks of the definition of what quasi-judicial power is. Well, if you come to think of it, it is not a court. Administrative agent, an admin agency is not a court, but it somehow has the consequence of depriving rights or regulating rights, no, akin to the acts of judicial bodies, no. So this is quasi-judicial power. This is the power to determine questions of fact to which legislative policy is to apply in accordance with the standards set by law, incidental to the power to regulate, but may also be granted by law. Well, for example, you have the Human Settlements Adjudication Commission. It is one of its powers is on the matter of the regulation of developers of subdivisions. No, it can determine if developers have shortchanged their buyers, no, after assessing the facts, or it may also regulate the conduct of the selling of, or not, it's the HLURB, but the questions on the conduct, no, controversies on the conduct of the development of properties, no, disputes between the homeowner and the developer, for instance, no. So it executes laws pertaining to housing. So The requirements for the exercise of quasi-judicial power is similar to the court. There must be jurisdiction, and due process must, of course, be observed. So, um, if you if you look at the matter of procedural due process, well, jurisdiction comes from law. If you want to look at the jurisdiction of an agency, look at the law that created the agency, and you would know there it's a jurisdiction. No? But insofar as procedural due process is concerned, this is the go-to case, no? Ang Tibay versus CIR. Ang Tibay being a shoe manufacturer. No? In this case of Ang Tibay, it sets down the cardinal primary rights of in administrative proceedings. Foremost, the right to a hearing. This includes the right to present one's case and submit evidence in support thereof. You recall that we mentioned this in Constitu, in the case of Surigao del Norte versus ERC, that a formal type trial or hearing is not essential, meaning it is possible that there could only be the submission of memoranda or position papers. It's not necessary that there be a witness on the witness stand to answer cross-examination questions or direct examination questions. A formal type hearing is not even essential. It may be conducted, but not essential. Okay? Like in the NLRC, for example, if you have your labor cases later on, you would be given not a scheduled trial, but a schedule for arbitration or mediation. So the labor arbiter may call for mediation of the parties, but eventually, when there is no mediation or settlement that comes up, what happens is the parties are made to submit their position papers or memoranda, no? Verified, and through the pleadings, the arbiter decides the case. So a formal type hearing is not necessary, just perhaps a submission of pleadings. No? This case of UP Board of Regents versus CA, when you speak of due process, again, does not require a trial type proceeding similar to those in the courts of justice. Again, repeating this case of the findings in this case of Surigao del Norte versus ERC, the formal hearing, trial type proceeding similar to those in the courts is not essential. Well, this is a very interesting case. I think this is a case on plagiarism, where the revocation of a degree came as a result, no, of the cheating or plagiarism committed by the student. No? So, other cases, the holding of an adversarial trial is discretionary, meaning there is not a necessity to mandate. No, it comes from the discretion of the agency or the through the implementing rules. No, if there is an actual adversarial trial that may be conducted by the tribunal. The right of the party to confront and cross-examine the opposing witness is essential also in administrative tribunals with quasi-judicial powers. It's a fundamental right. But here, the cross-examination comes in the form, possibly in the submission of pleadings. No? So second, the tribunal must consider the evidence presented. Edwards versus McCoy says that the right to adduce evidence without the corresponding duty on the part of the board to consider it is vain. Such right is conspicuously futile if the person or persons to whom the evidence is presented can thrust it aside without notice or consideration. So the tribunal must look at the record submitted to it and consider it in its ultimate findings. No? The decision must have something to support itself, must be supported by facts or by law. Okay, the decision must not be whimsical, therefore. The evidence must be substantial. It means such relevant evidence as a reasonable mind might accept as adequate to support a conclusion. What is substantial evidence? This is defined as the amount of relevant evidence which a reasonable mind might accept as adequate to support a conclusion. It is more than a mere scintilla of evidence. It need not be overwhelming or preponderant as required in civil cases, or evidence beyond reasonable doubt as required in criminal cases. But evidence must be enough for a reasonable mind to support a conclusion. So medyo magaan, madali lang. Okay, madaling i-prove ang yung point there, no? So, fifth requirement, the decision must be rendered on the evidence presented at the hearing or at least contained in the records and disclosed to the parties affected. Why? Because both parties must know what evidence they are up against. Both parties must know what evidence are presented against them so that they can respond accordingly. So the tribunal must also base its findings on the evidence submitted during the submissions or the hearing. The tribunal or body or any of its judges must act on its own independent consideration of the law and facts of the controversy and not simply accept the views of a subordinate in arriving at a decision. Meaning, the adjudicators or the persons making decisions in the exercise of this function must not delegate further the authority to adjudicate. No, this persons delegated with this authority cannot delegate it further. They must base their findings on their personal evaluations and observations. The board or body should, in all controversial questions, render its decision in such a manner that the parties of the proceeding can know the various issues involved and the reason for the decision rendered. Well, this simply says that the decision must state the facts and the law on as the basis for the decision. The decision must contain the issues that were resolved by the body. This would enable the parties who may want to appeal or ask for a reconsideration of the case to know where to strike, to know what part of the decision for them is unacceptable. So there is a violation of the due process requirement here in this case of Globe versus NTC for NTC's failure to sufficiently explain the reason for the decision rendered for being unsupported by substantial evidence and for imputing violation to the issue and issuing a corresponding fine. Okay, this involve a case raised by Globe to the NTC where the findings of the NTC lacked evidence. Note, however, in this case of Padua versus Ranada, no decisions. Okay, says that petitioners, suffice it to state that while Section 14 of Article 8 of the Constitution provides that no decision shall be rendered by any court without expressing therein clearly and distinctly the facts and law which it is based, applies only to the decisions of the Court of Justice and not an administrative agency. But this is a 2002 case. This case of Globe versus NTC requires support for the decision, but here that requirement now is only for criminal cases. But I beg to differ. This is part of the requirements of the Angtibay decision. No? Parties must know the basis for the decision, the issues that were raised, how the court or the tribunal decided. So in quasi-judicial proceedings, parties have the right to invoke self-incrimination, the right against self-incrimination. In an administrative hearing, the agency cannot, consistently with the self-incrimination clause, compel the person proceeded against to take the witness stand without his consent, because the right against self-incrimination extends to administrative hearings as well. But this is, according to Professor Duca, a matter that you must claim for yourself. It's a matter that you must claim for yourself. You must look into, you must raise it when you are asked incriminating questions. Otherwise, if you don't raise it, you lose the right. Okay? So, notice and hearing, in the exercise of quasi-judicial power, you must be extended the right to notice and subsequent hearing. Okay? Can you appeal decisions of administrative agencies? In the absence of a law granting the right to appeal, appeal may not be made. No, the right to appeal anyway is not a natural right, except when provided by the statute, it becomes a statutory right. That's why, since it's only a statutory right, parties which decide to appeal a decision of a tribunal must raise it properly. Technicalities may defeat their appeal because there is strict implementation on the rules for appeal, because it's not a fundamental right, it is a statutory right. So in the matter of appeal, the reviewing officer must be other than the officer who rendered the decision, of course, because of the apparent bias of the person if he will review his own decision. Okay, so the reviewing officer must be different from the officer who made the decision questioned. Does res judicata extend to quasi-judicial functions? No? The doctrine of res judicata only applies to judicial or quasi-judicial proceedings and not to the exercise of administrative powers. Okay, so here, look at this case, it extends to quasi-judicial proceedings, of course, but not the exercise of administrative powers. You try to look into this case of Nasipit Lumber on what this means. Let's proceed with these other powers on the next video.